Rick covered for me, and Travis covered for me, and Mark covered for me. So thank you guys again for doing that while I was out and traveling the world. But it is good to be back, and we are going to pick up where we left off in Matthew chapter 25. Let's see here, and we are going to we're going to be talking about the parable of the talents. So verse 14, Matthew 25 and verse 14. For it will be like a man going on a journey, who called his servants and entrusted to them his property. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away. He who had received the 5 talents went at once and traded with them, and he made 5 talents more. So also he who had the 2 talents made 2 talents more. But he who had received the 1 talent went and dug in the ground and hid his master's money. Now after a long time the master of those servants came and settled accounts with them. And he who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 talents more, saying, Master, you delivered to me 5 talents. Here, I have made 5 talents more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. And he also, who had the 2 talents, came forward, saying, Master, you delivered to me 2 talents. Here, I have made 2 talents more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. He also, who had received the 1 talent, came forward, saying, Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow, and gathering where you scattered no seed. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here, you have what is yours. But his master answered him, You wicked and slothful servant. You knew that I reap where I have not sown, and gather where I scattered no seed. Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and at my coming I should have received what was my own with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to him who has the 10 talents. For to everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. And cast the worthless servant into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So this is a pretty rich teaching. I mean, there's so many good lessons that you can get out of this. And I know in preaching, typically how I approach this story is, looking at that story and digging out some different things that you can get from that. But as we've been going through Matthew 24, and then going through Matthew 25, I'm also recognizing not just the story itself and the things that we can find within, which is, I think that's a perfectly legitimate approach to this at times, but I'm recognizing that there's a flow here and a context that this story is fitting inside that we need to notice. So going back to the end of Matthew 24, keeping in mind that Matthew 24 and 25 are one sermon. They're all one dissertation of Jesus. Toward the end of Matthew 24, Jesus asked, Who then is the faithful and wise servant, whom his master has set over his household to give them their food at the proper time? Blessed is that servant whom his master will find so doing when he comes. Truly I say to you, he will set him over all his possessions. And then he goes and he talks about the faithful servant versus the wicked servant. But there's that first question. Who then is the faithful and wise servant? And he expands on that a little bit in that first story, or that first contrast between the faithful and the wicked. But it seems to me in Matthew 25 that we now have these three stories that are going back to that initial question and answering that question. Let me tell you who the faithful and wise servants are. And so the last time when we were together, we talked about the parable of the 10 virgins. And we recognized that the faithful and the wise servant is the one who maintains preparation. They don't rest on past preparation. They don't rest on someone else's preparation, but they maintain personal preparation for the coming of the bridegroom, coming of the master. And there's this idea of who are you when the master's not there? When the master is delayed, or are you still faithful to the master when the master is not around? And so the first key was that idea of preparation. And now we see the idea of being faithful and wise with the master's possessions, with his property, even in the master's absence. And so last time it was about preparation, and now it's about possessions. It's about property. Now, the footnote I had in my Bible said that a talent was a monetary unit worth about 20 years' wages for a laborer. And the mistake I think I've often made coming to this is that, wow, 5 is a lot. And, 2's okay. But 1, he's not really trusting that guy a whole lot, is he? He's just giving him 1. And I get it. When we compare 1 to 5, it doesn't seem like much. But still, 20 years of wages to one person? That's a lot of trust. All right? Now, I think it's important to point out that we, in our modern day, we often use the word talent as to refer to gifts and abilities. And, the way that we use that word today, it's pretty much a synonym for ability or high ability, right? But here we're talking about wealth, and it was given according to their ability. So there's a distinction between talent and the ability. Now, we have to keep in mind that, of course, this is a parable, right? And certainly he's not just talking about how people use money. He's talking about more than that. And so secondarily, we might use this to refer to our abilities. We could use it for that. But I think we do need to see that it's much bigger than that. It's about the fact that God has entrusted his servants with his property. We have houses, and we have cars, and we have phones and computers and clothes and jobs and families and friends, spouses and children. And these are all things that the Master has blessed us with, things that he has entrusted us with while he's away. What are we supposed to do with all these things? All these things that we have. What are we supposed to do with these? I think one of the greatest treasures that we've been entrusted with is the gospel itself. The message and the power of God and salvation. We're a part of his church, and we have a responsibility to lift up and hold forth the truth. And I see a great danger if we decide to take that and go bury it in the ground somewhere instead of spreading it and using it for God's glory. One mistake I think we often make is instead of counting my own blessings and being thankful and happy about the blessings that I have and being a good steward of what I have, instead of doing that, oftentimes what I like to do is count your blessings. And then, I get jealous and I get envious because I'm more focused on what you have as opposed to what I have. So that's something that I think we need to make sure that we're careful not to do. And another thought, I think it's important to recognize that when I'm counting my blessings, it's not just to say, oh, look at how blessed I am. When I count my blessings, it's also supposed to point out how responsible I am. These things are given according to their ability, right? So it should show how responsible I am. And so the point is that I don't need to bury these things. I need to bring them and work with them and use them for God's glory, for the betterment and the furtherance of His kingdom, for the growth and the increase of His kingdom. And certainly the use of the gospel is supposed to be about that. But my family is supposed to be about that. And my house is supposed to be about that. And my car is supposed to be about that. God hasn't just blessed me with a car so that I can get around. He's blessed me with a car so that I can use it in service to His glory and to those who are around me. So, what are we doing with our blessings? What are we doing with our possessions? Because I believe that is reflective of our discipleship, and particularly in the absence of the master. So, it's kind of a sobering thing to think that when He returns, there will be an accounting for that. That's part of our life that we're responsible for to God. And this one talent guy isn't judged because he just has one talent. He's given judgment because he didn't use that one talent for God's glory. He acted out of fear rather than faith. And he said, I planted your talent in the ground, and now look, you can have it back, and you can do with it whatever you want. And the master points out, no. He said, I gave it to you for you to do what I wanted. So we need to be good stewards. We need to use the things that we have to serve the Lord. And we need to be serving Him with everything that we have. Now, here's another thing that I thought was interesting. When the master came back, the one talent man said, I was scared. He said, I was scared that I'd lose what was yours, and so I just did nothing. I dug a hole, put it in the ground, buried it, so that I could give it back to you when you came, so I could give you back what was yours. But I wonder, and I'm curious, if that's a genuine fear, or if that's just kind of an excuse, if that's just kind of lip service there. I mean, the master says, if you knew who I was, you would have at least given it to the bankers so that I'd get some interest out of it. You would have done that, maybe the absolute minimum, but you would have tried to provide a return. So, is this just an excuse? Was he really afraid? Because when the master rebukes him, what does the master say there whenever I'm sorry?
Oh, I think he did know his heart, because that his heart was, not in the right place. because then he called him slothful and all of those other things.
Mm-hmm.
So he knew what was in his heart, and that's the reason. Yes, he may have initially had some fear, but then it was laziness and all of those other things.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Yeah. He doesn't say, you fearful, cowardly servant, does he? No. He says, you wicked, slothful servant, or you wicked, lazy servant. Right? And if we're going to take this at face value, the master is getting down to what he thinks the issue is. Right? Whatever amount of fear that servant may have actually had at the beginning or whenever, the master says, here's the problem. You're lazy. You're lazy. And if you go back to Matthew 24, it says that the wicked servant there, what was he doing in Matthew 24? The wicked servant there was eating and drinking with drunkards, right? He's kind of eating and drinking with drunkards, which is kind of a lazy, convenient, self-indulgent type behavior. And now with this one talent servant, he seems to have that same laziness, that self-indulgence. I'm just kind of pursuing what's convenient. Yeah.
Something that kind of jumped out to me for the first time right now was we're talking about the kingdom of heaven. The beginning of chapter 25 says, "And the kingdom of heaven will be like," it goes into the parable of 10 virgins with the oil, and that's kind of covering the topic of preparedness. And then as we transition into this idea of something, if this parable could be summed up in one word, it would be stewardship. And it's stewardship of what? It's the kingdom. The master is leaving, Christ is leaving, because this is right before the plot to kill Jesus and everything else is about to take place. What are you going to do with the kingdom once it comes? And are you going to, I like to think of it almost as like a church. Are you going to take this church and bury it underground and basically say, well, Master, you weren't here. You weren't spreading the gospel. You were claiming Christians that other people were, evangelizing for, and that made me fearful that, we would evangelize incorrectly, so therefore I didn't evangelize at all. And you have someone who's, kind of being put in charge of 10 congregations who, through the influence and through the spreading of the kingdom, the wise investment of the investment of effort and time to improve their stewardship, then that kingdom grew. And then of course when this master returns, he's taking a look at, well, did you grow my kingdom or not? Because ultimately, if we're looking at 20 years worth of wages, just as a more than likely a non-literal example, we're looking at like hundreds of years worth of income here that is expected to have a return on it. And I can't help but I can't separate, now that I've kind of read this for the first time, I can't separate the idea that this is the kingdom of heaven that it's talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that it's a really good point about, we're talking about our blessings and the different things that we have, and I think one of the blessings, I mentioned the gospel is a blessing, and I think the church is a blessing, and I think that you're right. If you bury that and you don't spread that, I think we do have that responsibility that we need to be out, getting that return, right, and talking to others and evangelizing, and I think too often we might be afraid that we're not going to do it right or whatever, and so we just don't do anything, and then that doesn't help us at all, right?
Like, just because you're preserving yourself doesn't mean that you're doing the task that you've been given.
Right. That's a good point.
I call us like the 3 T's. They all had time, they all had talent, and they all had treasures. What did they do with them?
Mm-hmm.
That's the key.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's exactly.
Talent, treasure.
Yeah, and
that's what we have as individuals in the church. What are we doing with our time? What are we doing with our talent? What are we doing with our treasures? Are we glorifying God? Are we digging a hole in the ground like this guy did?
And I think it's a good opportunity for self-evaluation,
yeah.
for sure,
yeah.
because we do have the time, and maybe not as much as we want, But we do have some time, and we do have some resources.
Long
We
as
have,
we're breathing,
and
we have
yeah, we've got things that, yeah, exactly. We've got things that we can use for the betterment for the furtherance of the kingdom. And are we doing it? Are we using it? Or are we finding other ways to use that?
I think the spiritual end of this is, we really missed it a lot, applying too much from the physical things, but the value of the talent in that represents the value of the gift of God. And at the end of the chapter here, he says, "Go ye into all the world," which means go me or go you, and preach the gospel in every creature. That's the whole idea of it. And God's blessed some of us with a lot of talent, and others with not so much. But every one of us need to be aware of the gift we've got, the value of it, and be ever so desire to teach and spread that word. And God, as far as the physical things, our physical aspects we've got, doesn't mean anything to God. I mean, He'd give us a lot of stuff, but money and but teaching the word and showing somebody the truth. And I think that's a lot what this is about. You know, we need to use our talent to spread the gospel and teach those that are lost.
Yeah, exactly right. And I think sometimes when it comes to talking to others about Christ, about trying to spread that word, I think sometimes we put too much pressure on ourselves as far as, I've got to have it all perfect and right, and until I get it all perfect and right, I'm not going to say anything to anybody. And I don't think that's really the way. I've heard the statement before. Let me see if I can say it without messing it up. Let's see. Basically, it's the idea of you can't, like, if the student is ready, if the student's ready, the teacher will appear, and you basically can't say the wrong thing to the person who's ready to hear it, and you can't say the right thing to the person who's not ready to hear it. It's that idea of, you don't have to be perfect. If somebody is receptive to the gospel or ready to hear the gospel, you don't have to have it all, I've got to have just the right wording and just the right thing that I'm going to say in order to get everybody. Because I know that I've fallen into that trap before, where you're like, if I could just find that one thing that I can say and have, it's just the perfect phrase, and now everybody's gonna want to come be a member of the Church of Christ, and you can get so caught up in that. But there's not like a magic perfect phrase. There's not like a magic perfect thing. What you do is you just go out there and you just talk and be honest and be open, and if they're ready to hear it, then they'll take it. If they're not ready to hear it, then at least you planted the seed, and maybe somebody else will come along behind you and water it, right? And a little bit later on, that might start to grow. So I think sometimes we get a little too worried about the results. You know, we get very result oriented and focused, and we're so worried about, well, I went out and I talked to 100 people and none of them are here. Well, none of them are here right now, but you know, you did the thing that you were supposed to do. They may come later, they may not. So, like I said, somebody may need to come along and water them a little bit before they decide to come. But whether they show up or not, you still did what you were supposed to do. God says to go out and plant, right? We go out and we plant the seed. He gives the increase. And so I think sometimes we get a little too focused in on, well, I did all this inviting and nobody showed up. Well, if you did all that inviting, you did what you were supposed to do. So you keep watering, and maybe somebody else will water too, and then who knows, maybe one day they will show up. Do you else have anything you wanted to add? So, good comments, thank you. And, you know, so now we've got this one talent guy, and again, it kind of goes back to this idea of, we're talking about how it's kind of, they're lazy, and they're being self-indulgent, or they're kind of pushing what's convenient. And that idea of convenience and lazy and stuff kind of sticks in my head, and I think about, I mean, what could be more convenient than just digging a hole and burying a treasure and not thinking about it again until the master comes back? I mean, that'd be a pretty lazy and convenient thing to do, right? But, you know, unfortunately, you kind of want to be careful too, because with parables, first of all, you got to be careful when you're taking what is said and trying not to add to the meaning that's not intended. Try not to add something that's not intended. But you can also make a big mistake if you start talking about what's not said and adding to the meaning. And so I kind of want to be careful here, but it does make me ask, okay, while the 2 talent and the 5 talent guy are out trading and doing business and increasing the property, the kingdom for the master, what is this 1 talent guy doing? I mean, he's not trading.
And he's squandering his 3 T's, like Travis said.
Yeah.
And he was just squandering those. Another thing that came to me as this was being read was that the danger is in the fear, right? The guy gave fear as an excuse. Well, we all know that that's what it was. It was an excuse. But the danger is going through life living in fear of spreading the gospel and, spreading the good news rather than, just say it. Just do it. And like you said, tiny little seeds.
I think sometimes one of our biggest problems when it comes to trying to spread the word is we get pretty fearful of what other people are going to think about us, right? Or, what if I say something and they think I'm stupid, or they think I'm an idiot, or whatever. And, I'm sure that with the apostles out preaching and so forth, people thought they were crazy at times, right? And they even got to the point where they're getting beat and thrown in prison and all that stuff, and we're afraid somebody's going to say something to hurt our feelings, right? So if you try to compare those things, there's not much of a comparison there. But we can't be concerned, like the apostle said, we can't be concerned about pleasing men, about pleasing people. We got to make sure we're pleasing God, even if that we get our feelings a little hurt in the process. At least right now, we live in a country where we can say some things, and the worst that's going to happen more than likely is we're going to get our feelings hurt. They're making a time where that changes. But, if we're not willing to say it when our feelings are going to get hurt, what are we going to do whenever bodily harm might actually occur? So we might need to start working that muscle now while the worst that's going to happen is they're going to call us some names. So.
Could you explain 26 a little bit differenter?
Explain verse 26?
Yes. Where the master answered, said, "You know that I do not reap, but I can gather where I sow no seed."
His master answered him, "You wicked and slothful servant, you knew that I reap where I have not sown, and gathered where I sow no, or where I've scattered no seed." I think he's talking about, and y'all can kind of correct me on this. I get the idea that it's because he's got kind of his money working for him, like he's got that money, and it's kind of through, he's got other people doing it and for him, investments and things like that. Like he's not out there scattering it himself, but he's got workers that are out there doing it. That's kind of what I take from that, which I could be wrong, and somebody might be able to correct me on that. But that's kind of the idea that I had from that.
Well, that's why he wasn't going to get any from the last one that had one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the one guy he had or the guy who had the one didn't go out and do that for him. So,
thank you.
Absolutely. So, I don't know what the 1 talent guy was doing, and it makes me wonder if, maybe he was eating and drinking with drunkards. It talks about that with the wicked guy at the very beginning of all this. It talks about maybe that's what he was out doing. At least he wasn't spending the master's money on that, if that's what he was doing. He had it buried in the hole, so at least he wasn't doing that. But whatever he was doing, it wasn't being productive. It wasn't helping to further the master's kingdom or anything. And so, it's the idea of laziness. It's the idea of slothfulness. And I'm not doing the work that I'm supposed to be doing. I'm doing what's convenient for me. And, this all goes back to loyalty to the master, loyalty to the king. And he's not showing loyalty to his master because he's not faithfully using the master's property. the way it needs to be used, right? Did you have something?
You know, that's an interesting thought there, because it's a servant. It's one that's a servant. You could compare it to a Christian, or one that's obeyed the gospel and just doesn't do anything. One that doesn't get involved, one that sits back and will let somebody else do it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a very, very important factor, because look at today, look at, I mean, you've got every congregation, you've got those that are working and busy, and then it dwindles on down, and, the fact that he partners up with one of his here, the Sam's, one of his servants.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's pretty important to look at.
I think that's definitely important. Are we working?
We can't please our God and be with him in heaven someday on somebody else's coattail.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah, you can't ride somebody else's coattails into heaven. That's exactly right. We have to be working. Now, we don't all have to be doing the same thing, and I think that's something that needs to be pointed out. Sometimes people think, well, if I'm not up front doing something, then I'm not doing anything, and that's not the case either. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff that happens behind the scenes. There's all kinds of programs that take place and things that do, and the cooking and the going and visiting and all these things that a lot of you all do, because one person can't do it all. I mean, there's just not there's so much to do. One person can't do everything, and everybody can't do the same thing. We all have different talents, different abilities, like this talks about. And so whatever that is, whatever you find your talent or ability to be, you need to be working that to the best of your ability. That sounds kind of redundant, doesn't it? But yeah, so I think that's an important thing to realize too. We definitely need to be working. We don't all have to be doing the same thing, but if we're all doing what we can do, then everything will get covered. But if we're not doing what we can do, then something's going to be dropped. If we're waiting around for somebody else to do it, if it's something we can do and we're waiting for somebody else to do it, they might be doing the same thing. So it's not going to get done. So whatever you can find to do it, and do it with all your might, right? That's what the scripture says. All right, any more thoughts on that before we move into verse 31? Mark?
The whole thought here kind of reminds me of Paul in Philippians 2, where he's encouraging the brethren there to be active in their faith, and in verse 12 where he's talking about after he received salvation, he says, work out your salvation with fear and trembling, for it is God who is at work in you, both to will and to work for his good pleasure. And that's where each one of us, we got a different purpose for us in the kingdom, that different ways we can serve him. But when we just sit on our hands as a Christian, that's not what's supposed to happen after baptism. After baptism, we're supposed to roll up the sleeves, and it's like, now what can I do from now till I breathe my last to help further the kingdom? And it's God working in us that helps us overcome that fear and that trembling too. And any of us that have been around a while, I remember as a young person being afraid to talk to people, and I always admired Gary and his ability to be able to talk to people. And when I was on theater pig routes with him and see how he'd spur up conversations and stuff, it's like I always wanted to be able to do that. And over time, I've been able to overcome some of my fears and be a little bit like that, but it comes from, just doing it and realizing it's not as scary as it can be, and eventually you're going to have people respond and be receptive. That's going to give you more courage and excitement to want to share the good news with others, because sooner or later somebody's going to be receptive to it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And like you said, I mean, a lot of times this kind of starts out with fear, and it talks about, the one talent guy. I mean, he may have started out afraid, but you still got to eventually put yourself out there and do it, and that's the only way to get over it.
And that's no different than the physical. If you relate this to a business and just dollars, you're going to give somebody money and they're going to go and invest it and take a risk. And anybody that's running business, there's a little fear that goes along with it, but that's also motivation too, we can overcome our fears.
That's exactly right, and I think you're right. I mean, the only way to really overcome that is to do it, And you know, if you admire the way somebody else is able to do something, sometimes you can go talk to them, and you know, sometimes they can help you out a little bit with that. Sometimes it's so natural they don't even know they're doing it. So it's one of those things. But it goes back to everybody's got their own talents. So even though somebody else is able to do one thing, you're able to do something else. And you know, and sometimes you can move on and you can do other things as well that you're not quite as comfortable with. But a lot of times if we'll take the time to think about what am I good at, sometimes we can figure that out just by taking some self-reflecting, just like we were talking about a little while ago. I mean, this is a good one to stop and self-reflect on anyway. You know, am I doing the things that I need to do? Am I using the talents? Am I using the money? Am I using whatever I have that actually belongs to God? Am I using that to further His kingdom and do the things I need to do? So, good point.
That's one of the things in our prayers, you know, we ask our God to give us opportunities and to help us when He does. Help us know what to say or whatever, you know. We mess up a lot of times in our conversations, but as long as our heart's right and our thoughts are right, you know, just be as kind as possible, and people see that.
Yeah.
And you never know where it's going to go.
Yeah, and I think that's really, I'm not going to go into the next section because we're about done anyway, but I think that's really it too. I mean, I think you can, when you see somebody who needs the gospel, which is everybody, and you're talking to them about God, if you approach them with sincerity and with compassion and with love, not just going up to them to say, well, you're wrong and you're going to hell, and this is, you know, if you don't want to just clobber them, but unless they need clobbering, but you know, but most of the time, if you approach them with the right heart, with compassion, with love, I really care about you. I'm coming to you because I'm concerned about you. You know, people can tell that. People can see that. They can see you're not just trying to manipulate me or trick me or anything like that. If you're coming at them right, but if you're coming at them with kind of that attitude of, you know, I'm better than you, and here's all the reasons you're wrong and I'm right, and all that, then they can sense that too. So I think it's just a matter of having the right heart, approaching with the right heart, and then it doesn't matter as much what you say or the way you say it. I mean, what you say is going to be, you know, you're going to tell them the truth and so forth. So, I mean, it matters in what you say as far as that goes, but, you know, you don't have to have the perfect wording and the perfect everything. You just talk to them. And a lot of times just having that open, honest conversation is enough to get people to realize, oh, this person actually cares about me. They're not just trying to trick me or manipulate me in some way. Mark?
I always thought that's kind of what Paul was referring to when he talked about his thorn in the flesh, that it was something he was self-conscious about or something that he thought affected his ministry, but maybe it helped because if he had a speech impediment or whatever it may have been, you know, it might have been something that bothered him, but because his attitude and his love and concern for those around him was such, you know, he said, when I am weak, then I am strong. You know, he actually come across better because he wasn't the most handsome man and elegant in speech and stuff like that, where he just impressed the socks off somebody, but he was able to impress the socks off somebody in a very humble state because of his thorn in the flesh, whatever it was.
Yeah, my dad tells a story that he said that I might mess it up, but I think he talked about how he would he was kind of afraid to go into ministry because he was like, you know, I'm not going to be able to do it well or talk well or speak well. But I think it was someone he went to college with who he heard give a sermon, and he stuttered. And he said he stuttered all the way through it. But he said when it was over, he's like, he realized that was a really good lesson. He actually got something out of it and realized that, you know what, you don't have to be really good at speaking to get a really good message across. You can have, you know, you don't have to be perfect in the way you speak. You don't have to, whatever the thorn in the flesh Paul had, that doesn't have to hinder what he can accomplish through the power of God. And so I think he said that was the thing that made him realize, okay, I'll go into I'll go into preaching now. I think he decided to change his major and went over into preaching at that point. But yeah, these things that we are afraid are gonna hinder us and make us look bad. You know, sometimes they make us more relatable to people, right? Because they realize, well, if this guy can do it, I can do it too, right? So can't let those things stop us. Need to use them to move forward. Anything else where he lets everybody fly in here? Yeah.
I think it's important to remember that he did call us. Okay, he's calling his servants, but he called us to be one of his.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right.
That's a very big privilege.
It is. Yeah, and to take that to heart and realize that he's given us that responsibility and to take it seriously. So, thank you guys. Appreciate it.